I'm going to begin now. I'm going to be reading from a book on Mars, and first a little introduction to it. Begin by citing a headline on a website in last month, and the headline was the following: "It's the month of Mars. 3 red planet missions set to launch in July." And indeed, 3 countries, the United States, the United Arab Emirate, and China, all launched missions to Mars last month. 2 of these missions are designed to search for evidence of some kind of life, either presently existing or existing in the past on Mars. And this is just the most recent example of what has been at least a century-long fascination with the red planet, the 4th planet out from the sun, of the possibility of there being life on this planet. This set me to thinking as both a historian of science, an astronomy enthusiast, and a science fiction enthusiast to do something on Mars today. And what I'm going to be doing is reading from a book over a century old by the astronomer Percival Lowell. Now, just briefly, Percival Lowell was a fascinating person. His dates are 1855 to 1916, born in Boston in a Boston Brahmin family, the Lowell family. He had a brother who became president of Harvard. Lowell went to Harvard, majored in mathematics, already showed an interest in astronomy, but in fact went into the family textile business at first, and then in the 1880s into Far Eastern diplomacy in China and Japan. And only in the 1890s did he return to what was his first and true love, astronomy. And that was in connection with learning about the discovery by the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli in 1877 of what Schiaparelli called canali on Mars. In Italian, this is a word that can mean a lot of different things, normally means something like channels. But Lowell interpreted as being canals. And in 1894, being a wealthy man, went out to Flagstaff, Arizona, founded an observatory there and started observing Mars. And what he found, or claimed to find, was a planet-wide network of straight-line canals. And are the pictures up here now? Okay, we're going to show some pictures, taken drawings, and in one case a photograph, taken by Lowell of these canals. Okay, there are going to be 4 of these pictures. I'll let them go through quickly. I think you can see from the drawings. Lowell interpreted these as being artificial productions, and indeed productions indicating intelligent life on Mars. He wrote 3 books on the subject: Mars of 1895, Mars and its Canals in 1906, and Mars as the Abode of Life in 1908. It's the last of these, and I'm going to be reading from the chapter called Proof of Life on Mars. I might mention that Mars is coming up to what's called opposition, that is its closest to the Earth, in October. It will be very, very bright and very easily seen in the evening sky, rivaling the planet Jupiter. Well, to the readings. Chapter 6, the last chapter of Mars as the Abode of Life. The title of the chapter is Proofs of Life on Mars. Astronomical discovery is of 2 kinds. If it consists simply in adding another asteroid or satellite to those already listed, obedience to the law of gravitation with subsequent corroboration of place alone is needed for belief. But if it relates to the detection of an underlying truth as yet unrecognized, then it is only to be unearthed by reasoning on facts after they are obtained, and affects credence according to one's capacity for weighing evidence. Breadth of mind must match breadth of subject, for to plodders along prescribed paths a far view fails of appeal. Conservative settlers in a land differ in quality from pioneers. Coordination is the end of science, the aim of all attempt at learning what this universe may mean. And coordination is only another name for theory, as the law of gravitation witnesses. Now, to be valid, a theory must fulfill two conditions. It must not be contradicted by any fact within its purview, and it must assign an underlying thread of reason to explain all the phenomena observed. Circumstantial evidence must first lead to a suspect, and then this suspect must prove equal to accounting for the facts. This method we shall pursue in the case before us, and it will conduce to understanding the evidence, to keep its order of presentation to the detective in presenting it at the bar of reason. Starting with known physical laws applicable to the concentration of matter, we found, he's summarizing really what the book has already said, we found that though in general the course of evolution of the Earth and Mars was similar, the smaller mass of Mars should have caused it to differ eventually from the Earth in some important respects. Three of these are noteworthy. One, its surface should be smoother than the Earth's. Two, its oceans relatively less. And three, its air scantier. On turning to Mars itself, we then saw that these three attributes of the planet were precisely those the telescope disclosed. The planet's surface was singularly flat, being quite devoid of mountains. Its oceans of the past covered at most 3/8 of its surface instead of the 3/4 as with us. Its air was relatively thin. We next showed that physical loss should, from its smaller mass, have caused it to age quicker, and that this aging should reveal itself by the more complete departure of what oceans it once possessed and by the wider spread of deserts. Telescopic observations we then found asserted these two peculiarities. One, no oceans now exist on the planet's surface. Two, deserts occupy 5/8 of it. From such confirmation of the principles of planetary evolution from the present aspect of the planet Mars, we went on to consider the two most essential prerequisites to habitability, water and warmth. Water we sought first, and we found it in the polar caps. The phenomena of the polar caps proved explicable as consisting of water and not as of anything else. Still more important was the question of temperature. We took this up with particularity. We found several factors to the problem not hitherto reckoned with, and that when these were taken into account, the result came out entirely different from what had previously been supposed. Instead of a temperature prohibitive to life, one emerged from our research entirely suitable for it. Thus, the conditions on Mars showed themselves hospitable to both great orders of life, that is, the animals and the plants. The latter, the plants, actually revealing its prominence by its seasonal changes of tint. Here we reach the end of what might directly be disclosed in the organic economy of the planet. For at this point, we brought up before a most significant fact, that vegetable life could thus reveal itself directly, but that animal life could not. Not by its body, but by its mind would it be known. Across the gulf of space, it could be recognized only by the imprint it had made on the face of Mars. And now I refer to the slides I showed before of Lowell's pictures of Mars and drawings of Mars. Turning to the planet, we witnessed a surprising thing. There on the Martian disk were just such markings as intelligence might have made. Seen even with the unthinking eye, they appeared strange beyond belief, but viewed thus in the light of deduction, they seemed positively startling, like a prophecy come true. Confronting the observer are lines and spots that but impress him the more as his study goes on with their non-natural look. So uncommonly regular are they, and on such a scale as to raise suspicion whether they can be by nature regularly produced. Next to one's own eyesight, the best proof of this is in the unsolicited endorsement it has received in the skepticism their depiction invariably invokes. Those who have not been privileged to see them find it well nigh impossible to believe that such things can be. Unnatural regularity, the observations show, betrayed itself in everything to do with the lines, in their surprising straightness, their amazing uniformity throughout, their exceeding tenuity, and their immense length. These traits, instead of disappearing, the better the canals have been seen, as was confidently prophesied, have only come out with greater insistence. With increased study, not only the assurance gains that they are as described, but a mass of detail has been added about them, impossible to reconcile with any naturally known process. First, the lines cannot be rivers, since rivers are never straight and never uniform in width. Now we see the canals so well as to be quite certain of their evenness. The best proof of this is that, though each is uniform, some are at least 10 times the size of others. If one of them dwindled en route, we should have ample measure of the fact. Nor can the lines be cracks in the surface, because cracks are also not straight, and because cracks end before finishing. We have examples of undoubted cracks in more than one heavenly body, and their appearance is quite unlike the look of the lines of Mars. The moon offers such in many, if not all, of her so-called rills. You have to bear with me, I have to take time. Still more inexplicable on any natural hypothesis is the systematized arrangement of the lines to form a network over the whole planet. That the lines should go directly from certain points to certain others in an absolutely unswerving direction, that they should there meet lines that have come with like directness from quite different points of departure, that sometimes more than 10 of them should thus rendezvous, and rarely less than 6. And that lastly, this state of intercommunication should be true all over the disk, are phenomena that no natural physical process that I could conceive of, and no one else seems to have been able to either, can in the least explain. Yet this arrangement cannot be due to chance, the probabilities against the lines meeting one another in this orderly manner being millions to 1. But the canals are not all that is wonderful. We have to reckon with the oases as well. These are remarkable both in themselves and in their relationship to the system of lines, for they occur at the junctions, only at the junctions, and virtually always at the junctions. They are thus of the nature of knots in the network. No explanation can be given of this by purely physical laws. But long before the catalogue of geometrical curiosities has drawn to its close, for it were wearisome to count them all, and where even one is so cogent, numbers do not add, it becomes apparent to anyone capable of weighing evidence that these things which so palpably imply artificiality on their face cannot be natural products at all. but that the observer apparently stands confronted with the workings of an intelligence akin to, and therefore appealing to, his own. What he is gazing on typifies not the outcome of natural forces of an elemental kind, but the artificial product of a mind directing it to a purposed and definite end. When once the standpoint is adopted, we begin to see light. The recognition of artificiality puts us on a track where we gather explanation as we proceed. The extreme threads of the worldwide network of canals connected with the dark blue patches at the edge of one or the other of the polar caps. Connected at the edge of one or the other of polar caps. But these are not always visible. In the winter season, they fail to show. Not till the cap has begun to melt do they make their appearance, and then they come out dark and strong. Now the cap in winter is formed of snow and ice that melts as the summer comes on. Here then the attentive ear seems to catch the note of running water. From their poleward origins, the lines begin to darken down the disk. One after the other takes up the thread of visibility to hand it on to the next in place. So the strange communication travels carried from the Arctic zone through the temperate and the tropic ones onto the equator and then beyond it over into the planet's other hemisphere. A flow is here apparent, journeying with measured progress over the surface of the globe. Here again, the mental ear detects the sound of water percolating down the latitudes. Across what once were seas but are seas no more, the darkening of the lines advances with the same forthrightness as over the ochre continental tracts. Blue-green areas of vegetation and arid wastes alike are threaded by the silent deepening of tint. Latitude bars it not, nor character of country. It great circles the old sea bottoms as cheerfully as it caravans the desert steppes. The persistency made possible by the loss of what the seas once held, the thought of water is once more thrust upon the sense, its absence now as telling as its present was before. One hears it in the very stillness the lack of it promotes. Then, as with quickened sense one listens, the mind is aware of antiphonal response in the unlocking of the other polar cap to send its scanty hoardings and similar rilling over long parched land. The note of water confronts us thus at every turn of this strange action. Water, then, must be the word of the enigma, the clue that will lead us to the unloosening of the riddle. But though water it be, this is not the complete solution of the problem. For as one ponders the unnatural character of the action dawns on one. As one ponders, the unnatural character of the action dawns on one. That a wave of progression passes through the canals down the disk, that something then proceeds from the pole to the equator, and that this something can be none other than water giving rise to vegetation, sounds simple and forthright. The startling character of the action is not at once apparent. It becomes so only when we try to account for the locomotion. When we so envisage it, the transfer turns out to be a most astounding and instructive thing. Face to face, we find ourselves with a motion of great magnitude occurring without visible or physically imaginable cause. A body of water travels 3,300 miles at a rate of 51 miles a day under no material compulsion whatever. It leaves the neighborhood of the pole where it was gravitationally at home and wanders to the equator where gravitationally it was not wanted without the slightest prompting on the part of any natural force. The deduction is inevitable. It must have been artificially conducted over the face of the planet. We are left no alternative but to suppose it intelligently carried to its end. Nor is this the limit of the extraordinary performances shown by the progressive darkening of the canals down the disk. Were they actuated by natural forces, what they do next would be simply incredible. For not content with descending to the equator without visible means of propulsion, once arrived there, they promptly proceed to cross it into the planet's other hemisphere and run up the latitudes with equal celerity on the other side. Now, any physical inducement given them to come equatorward must have its action reversed so soon as that dividing line was crossed. If then they were in any way helped to the early part of their peregrination by natural forces, they would be hindered by them in the latter portion of their career. Thus, the only rational result of our discussion of the canals is that these things are not dependent on natural forces for their action, but are artificial productions designed to the end they so beautifully serve. In the canals of the planet we are looking at are the work of local intelligence now dominant on Mars. Such is what the circumstantial evidence points to unmistakably. To detection of a motive we now turn. And here it is our study of planetary evolution in general that becomes of service. As a planet ages, its surface water grows scarce. Its oceans in time dry up, its rivers cease to flow, its lakes evaporate. Its fauna, if it have any, dependent as they are upon water for life, must more and more be pushed to it for that prime necessity to existence. As the water leaves a planet, departing into space, so much of it as does not sink out of sight into its interior stands for a while a tiptoe in its air before taking final flight into the sky. In the planet's economy, it has ceased to be water and becomes that more ethereal thing, water vapor. In one way and place only does it ever in any amount descend to earth again and take on even transiently its liquid state. This is in the polar caps. The general meteorologic circulation of the planet deposits it there throughout the winter months. From the cold of the Arctic latitudes, its deposition takes the form of snow or ice, and in consequence of this solid state is largely tethered to the spot where it falls, remaining in situ until the returning sun melts it in the spring. This is the state of things on Mars. When this unlocking occurs, and while the water is in its intermediate liquid state between not easily transportable ice and ungatherable vapor, it is in a condition to be moved and may be drawn upon for consumption. Then and then only is it readily available for use, and then if ever it must be tapped. Now, in the struggle for existence, water must be got, and in the advanced condition of the planet, this is the only place where it is in storage and whence, therefore, it may be had. Round the semestral release of this naturally garnered store, everything in the planet's organic economy must turn. There is no other source of supply. Its procuring depends upon the intelligence of the organisms that stand in need of it. If these be of high enough order of mind to divert it to their ends, its using from a necessity will become a fact. Here, then, is the motive of the most compelling kind for the tapping of the polar caps and the leading of the water they contain over the surface of the planet. The primal motive of self-preservation. No incentive could be stronger than this. Our motive found being of the most drastic kind, it remains now to examine whether it can be put into execution. As a planet ages, any organism upon it would share in its development. They must evolve with it, indeed, or perish. At first they change only as the environment offers opportunity in a lowly, unconscious way. But as the brain develops, they rise superior to such occasioning. Originally, the organism is the creature of its surroundings. Later, it learns to make them subservient to itself. In this way, the organism avoids unfavorableness in the environment or turns unpropitious fortune to good use. Man has acquired something of the art here on the earth, and what with clothing himself in the first place and yoking natural forces in the second, lives in comfort now where in a state of nature he would incontinently perish. Such adaptation in mind, making it superior to adaptation in body, is bound to occur in the organic life on any planet, if it is to survive at all. For conditions are in the end sure to reach a pass where something more potent than body is required to cope with them. It is possible to apply a test to tell whether such life existed or not, for certain signs would be forthcoming were such intellect there. Increase of intelligence would cause one species in the end to prevail over all others, as it prevailed over the environment. What it found inconvenient or unnecessary to enslave, it would exterminate, as we have obliterated the bison and domesticated the dog. This species would thus become the lord of the planet and spread completely over its face. Any action it might take would in consequence be planet-wide in its showing. Now, such is precisely what appears in the world-spread system of canals, that it joins the surface from pole to pole and girdles it at the equator, betrays a single purpose there at work. Not only does one species possess the planet, but even its subdivisions must labor harmoniously to a common aim. Nations must have sunk their local patriotism in a wider breadth of view, and the planet be a unit to the general good. As the being has conquered all others, so will it at last be threatened itself. In the growing scarcity of water will arise the premonition of its doom. To secure what may yet be got will thus become the forefront of its endeavor, to which all other questions are secondary. Thus, if these things are capable of making their presence noticeable at all, their great occupation should be that of water-getting, and should be the first, because the most fundamental trace of their existence as an outsider would be privileged to catch. The last stage in the expression of life upon a planet's surface must be just antecedent to dying of thirst. Whether it came to this pass by simple exhaustion, as in the case of Mars, or by rotary retardation, as in the case of Mercury and Venus, the result would be all one to the planet itself. Failure of its water supply would be the cause. To procure this indispensable would be its last conscious effect. With an intelligent population, this inevitable would be long foreseen. Before it was upon the denizens of the globe, preparations would have been made to meet it, and this would be possible, for the intelligence obtained would be of an order to correspond. A planet's water supply does not depart in a moment. Long previous to any wholesale imminence of default, local necessity must have begun the reaching out to distant supply. Just as all our large cities today go far to tap a stream or a lake, so must it have been on Mars. Probably the beginnings were small and inconspicuous, as the water first locally gave out. From this it was a step to greater distances, until necessity lured them even to the pole. The very process, one of addition instead of one of total synchronous construction, seems to show stereotype to us in the canals. These run in their fashion, rather with partial than with teleologic intent, giving as much concern to halfway points as to the goal itself, although in their action now they are totally involved. The thing was not done in a day, and by that very fact stamps the more conclusively its artificial origin. The ability of beings there to construct such arteries of sustenance, two considerations will help to make it comprehensible. One of these minifies the work, the other magnifies the workers. In the first place, it is not what we see that would have to be constructed. The object of endeavor is not only the water itself, but the products that the water makes possible. It is vegetation, which is matter of immediate concern, water being of immediate employment. This then is what would probably show, just as on the earth, it is the irrigated strip of reclaimed desert, and not the Nile itself, which would make its presence evidence across interplanetary space. If these lines are irrigated bands of planting, the vertebral canal would be a mere invisible thread in the midst of which it gave growth. This alone would have to be made, and indeed would probably be covered to prevent evaporation. Now we have evidence that the canals are thus composed of nerve and body. When they lie down, they do not entirely vanish. Under the visual conditions of Flagstaff, they may still be made out in their dead season, the mere skeletons of themselves as they later fill out. And even so, we do not actually see the nerve itself. With this motive of self-preservation for clue, and with a race equal to the emergency, we should expect to note certain general phenomena. Both polar caps would be pressed into service in order to utilize the whole available supply, and also to accommodate most easily the inhabitants of each hemisphere. We should thus expect to find a system of conduits of some sort worldwide in its distribution and running at its northern and southern ends to termini in the caps. This is precisely what the telescope reveals. These means of communication should be, if possible, straight, both for economy of space and of time, it being especially necessary to avoid any wasteful evaporation on the road. Construction of such would need be very difficult, if not impracticable, on Earth, owing to the often mountainous character of its surface. But on Mars, this is not the case. As we have seen, there are fortunately no mountains on Mars. Thus, the great obstacle to canals, and in consequence, the great obstacle to their acceptance, is providentially removed. Terrain offers the least of objections, terror the greatest of spurs to their construction. Thus we see that not only should the execution be possible, but that it should exhibit precisely the phenomena we saw. It would be interesting, doubtless, to learn how our body, these inhabitants, an analysis reaches out to touch. But body is the last thing we are likely to know of them. Of their mind, as embodied in their works, we may learn much more. And after all, is not that the more pregnant knowledge of the two? Something of this we have surveyed together. But beyond the limelight of a short deduction stands many facts awaiting their turn to synthetic coordination, which we have not touched upon. I'm going to skip it towards the end. In our exposition of what we have gleaned about Mars, we have been careful to indulge in no speculation. I'm not sure I would agree with that. This is my parenthesis. The laws of physics and the present knowledge of geology and biology, affected by what astronomy has to say of the former subject, have conducted us, starting from the observations to the recognition of other intelligent life. We have carefully considered the circumstantial evidence in the case, and we have found that it points to intelligence acting on that other globe and is incompatible with anything else. We have then searched for motive and have lighted upon one which thoroughly explains the evidence that observation offers. We are justified, therefore, in believing that we have unearthed the cause of our conclusion, and our conclusion is this: that we have in these strange features which the telescope reveals to us witness that life, and life of no mean order, at present inhabits the planet. Part and parcel of the information is the order of intelligence involved in the beings thus disclosed. Particularly impressive is the thought that life on another world should thus have made its presence known by its exercise of mind, that intelligence should thus mutely communicate its existence to us across far stretches of space itself, remaining hid, appeals to all that is highest and most far-reaching in man himself. More satisfactory than strange this, for In no other way could the habitation of the planet have been revealed. It simply shows again the supremacy of mind. Men live after they are dead by what they have written while they were alive, and the inhabitants of a planet tell of themselves across space, as do individuals athwart time by the same imprinting of their mind. Thus, not only do the observations we have scanned lead us to the conclusion that Mars at this moment is inhabited, but they land us at the further one that these denizens are of an order whose acquaintance was worth the making. Whether we ever shall come to converse with them in any more instant way is a question upon which science at present has no data to decide. More important to us is the fact that they exist, made all the more interesting by their precedence of us in the path of evolution. Their presence certainly ousts us from any unique or self-centered position in the solar system, but so with the world did the Copernican system, the Ptolemaic, and the world survived this disposing change. So may man. To all who have a cosmoplanetary breadth of view, it cannot be but pregnant to contemplate extra-mundane life and to realize that we have warrant for believing that such life now inhabits the planet Mars. A sadder interest attaches to such existence, that it is, cosmically speaking, soon to pass away. To our eventual descendants, life on Mars will no longer be something to scan and interpret. It will have lapsed beyond the hopes of study or recall. Thus, to us, it takes on an added glamour from the fact that it is not long to last. For the process that brought it to its present pass must go on to the bitter end, until the last spark of Martian life goes out. The drying up of the planet is certain to proceed until its surface can support no life at all. Slowly but surely time will snuff it out. When the last ember is thus extinguished, the planet will roll a dead world through space, its evolutionary career forever ended. That's the end of my reading. I just want to make one or two comments. Lowell, in many ways, inspired the tradition in science fiction, starting with H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, to focus on Mars, on, if you will, little green men, on intelligence, creatures living on Mars, and continues to inspire us. The other thing I'll point out is that Lowell's view of this network of artificial canals did not hold up. But it is, in my brief excursion to try to see when it came to an end, that proved to be difficult. As late as the 1940s, there were astronomers who claimed to see something like his network of canals, but doubted that they were artificial. Thought they were, in fact, what he called rills or cracks in the surface, rather than artificially constructed canals. It was only in the 1960s, with the first Mariner probes of Mars, that the canals were conclusively and definitively proven incorrect. Debunked is the word I was looking for. However, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the fascination with Mars as a possible harbor of life now or sometime in the past continues, as the 3 missions that were launched in July testified to. Thank you very much.